The ancient Egyptians kept pet crocodiles and fed them to their kings. They created a fake sun god named Ra, just so they could have someone to blame when things went wrong. What do you think you know about ancient Egypt? The cradle of civilization, where the River Nile made farming possible, and where people first came up with the idea of zero, among other mathematical concepts. It's also the home of some of the greatest mysteries in the world, such as the identity of the enigmatic figure known as the Man in the Iron Mask, found buried deep beneath the Great Pyramid of Giza, and take them to the Temple of Ptah, where they would be tortured until they confessed their crimes. These confessions were then written down on papyrus and used as evidence against the accused, who were typically put to death. They were also pretty big fans of pet crocodiles. But why would they keep pet? They also had pet cats, dogs, baboons, and even monkeys. Well, it turns out that baboons don't actually have any venom. In fact, they're pretty docile animals. As a result, they took great measures to protect themselves from these spirits, including wearing amulets and making offerings to the gods. They would often make mistakes, which would anger the real sun god and cause him to do something bad to them. For example, one time the Egyptians made a fake sun god with only one eye instead of two, but the results were definitely worth it. The pyramid is still standing strong, and it's one of the most iconic structures in the world. Of course, this wasn't the only pyramid built in Egypt. He wanted to keep her there until he decided what to do with her, but she was able to escape with the help of some friends. She then fled to Rome, where she lived in exile until her death at the age of 51. There were many others that served similar purposes, but none of them were quite as impressive as the Great Pyramid of Giza. But sadly, she was never given the credit she deserved. This angered the real sun god so much that he sent a plague to punish them. She was famous for her intelligence and her beauty, and she was also responsible for building one of the most impressive structures in the ancient world, the Lighthouse of Alexandria. But did you know that she had a twin sister named Arsinoe IV? Well, she did, and she was just as intelligent and just as beautiful as Cleopatra. But one thing is for sure, they were one of the most advanced civilizations of their time. They had a system of writing, a complex religion, and a highly developed culture. They also had a strong military and were able to conquer large parts of North Africa. But their achievements didn't stop there. The Egyptians were also skilled engineers and architects. They built huge pyramids and temples that are still standing today. They also invented a number of useful devices, including the plow and the sail. In fact, she was so smart that she was able to escape from prison twice. One of the most effective ways to protect oneself from evil spirits, according to the Egyptians, was to have a fake sun god. That's right, they believed that if they created a fake sun god, it would distract the real sun god from doing anything bad to them. So every morning the Egyptians would create a new fake sun god and offer it up to the real sun god. Then they would hope that the real sun god would be too distracted by the fake sun god to do anything bad to them. Thanks for watching. See you next time. It is likely that the Egyptians didn't realize that baboons could be dangerous until they started keeping them as pets, and then they quickly learned their lesson. They would often keep these animals as companions, but they also used them for more practical purposes. They would do something much more drastic. They would build a pyramid.
That's right.
Pyramids weren't just tombs for pharaohs. They were also used as a way to get things done. The Egyptians believed that the pharaoh was a god, and as such he needed a special place to rest when he died. This is why the pyramids were so massive and elaborate. They were designed to impress the gods and show them how powerful the pharaoh was. For example, cats were often used to control rodent populations, while dogs were used for hunting. Egyptians were particularly fond of baboons, which they believed could bring good luck. They would keep them as pets and even mummify them after they died. Well, because they believed that crocodiles could bring good luck, Egyptians would often keep pet crocodiles as a way to ensure that their crops would be fruitful, or that they would win a battle. They would even feed the crocodiles to their kings as a form of tribute. One of the most famous examples of this was King Ptolemy XII, who was supposedly fed to crocodiles by his own wife. Yeah, you heard that right. His own wife wanted him dead, and one of their most famous pyramids was built in only 27 years. The process of mummification was designed to preserve the body for the afterlife, and it worked pretty well. But that doesn't mean that the Egyptians didn't sometimes mess up. In fact, one mummy was found with a bullet hole in its head, suggesting that it was shot at some point in the past. There are several theories as to how this happened. One is that the bullet was fired by an archaeologist who was trying to open the mummy's coffin. Another is that the bullet was left over from the battle between Napoleon's army and the Ottoman Empire in 1798. The last theory is that the bullet was fired by a member of the secret organization known as the Freemasons, who supposedly used mummies as a way to communicate with each other. We may never know for sure, but it is safe to say that this particular mummy was as well preserved as it could have been. But what if I told you that everything you learned about this ancient culture wasn't entirely true? That's right. Some of what we once thought were historical facts turn out to be nothing but myths. But the truth is far stranger than fiction. These are just a few of the many weird facts about ancient Egypt that will make you look at this civilization like you've never seen it before. When the ancient Egyptians felt threatened by a foreign power, they would often surrender to avoid bloodshed. This isn't surprising given that the Egyptians were known for being but it makes sense considering that they had no standing army. However, there's one account that suggests that the Egyptians did indeed have an elite fighting force, the royal guard of the pharaoh. They weren't exactly elite bodyguards who protected the pharaoh from harm. Instead, these guards were responsible for punishing anyone who criticized the pharaoh or his policy. If you didn't like what the pharaoh had to say, well then you got the short end of the stick. So join me today as we go back in time and learn about some of the strangest things that the Egyptians were into. Welcome back everyone. I'm here to answer the question. But while thousands of years have passed since the days of the pharaohs, there's still plenty of evidence left behind that can teach us about life in ancient Egypt. Let's get started. In order to prevent any dissent, the royal guard of the pharaoh would kidnap those who criticized him. As we all know, Egyptian mummies are pretty creepy. But what if I told you that mummies weren't the only things the ancient Egyptians were into? But crocodiles weren't the only animals that Egyptians kept as pets. Now, I know what you're thinking. How could the ancient Egyptians have kept pet baboons and not known that they were highly venomous? The ancient Egyptians were very superstitious people, and they believed that the world was full of evil spirits. You might be wondering, why didn't this work? Well, it turns out that the ancient Egyptians weren't very good at making fake sun gods. When the ancient Egyptians needed to get something done, they wouldn't just call up a friend or hire someone. It took over 20,000 workers nearly 27 years to complete the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza. We've all heard of Cleopatra, the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt. When Arsinoe IV was just 14 years old, she was locked up in a temple by her father. King Ptolemy XII, Arsinoe IV was a brilliant strategist, and she used her intelligence to help Cleopatra come out on top in their battles. There are a lot of things that we don't know about the ancient Egyptians. We may never know everything about the ancient Egyptians, but one thing is for sure, they were truly an amazing civilization.